She discovered she's living with a serial killer. Her brother used to be a normal, wonderful guy, but one day he started dating a strange, dark, and charismatic girl. After one bizarre night, which you'll witness too, he was changed forever, all because of a condition the siblings share that turned into a curse. Can you guess what that condition is? Drop your guesses in the comments. This is a horror tale that's part of a grand universe filled with chilling and captivating stories. Subscribe to follow along. I'm the writer, the creator of these universes and many more to come. Without further ado, I present to you The Family Curse. Felicia heard the scream while wearing headphones. Pain, pure agony, echoed in that scream, a horror so immense it seemed to tear through the throat. Her brother was in trouble. She ripped off her headphones, but all she could hear were the neighborhood dogs barking and a few lights flicking on in nearby houses. No more screams, yet something deep within her soul told her that danger was close. Rushing to his room, she pounded on the door, but all she could hear was the faint sound of the shower running. After much persistence, the door creaked open, and there she was. Blonde hair tousled and loose, a mischievous smirk on her lips, and an intense, piercing gaze. It was Lisbela, or, as she preferred to be called, Liz.
Some problem, my dear sister-in-law?
Felicia was about to demand answers when her eyes caught the sight of her brother Claudio's bed. The sheets were soaked in red, not just a few drops, an alarming, overwhelming amount, enough to make her stomach turn with the thought that someone could have bled out completely. Her heart raced. Her brother wasn't there. She turned to Liz, her voice trembling as she screamed, "What the hell happened? Where's my brother?" But Liz only smiled, a slow, unsettling grin that sent a chill crawling up Felicia's spine. Without hesitation, Felicia lunged for the bathroom door, pounding on it, shouting her brother's name in a panic. She debated for a moment whether she should force it open. Then the door creaked slightly ajar. Claudio poked his head out, his expression calm and different. His hair seemed fuller, glossier, as though he'd just walked out of a salon. His eyes, once a dull brown, now glimmered with an intensity that didn't seem entirely human. Even his mannerisms felt off. "What's wrong, Felicia?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost soothing. Felicia stared at him, momentarily speechless. This was her brother, but it wasn't. Something had changed. Claudio chuckled, brushing off her concerns. "I didn't scream. Maybe you dreamed it. Everything's fine." Felicia pointed to the blood-soaked sheets. "Fine? Then what the hell is that?" Liz chimed in before Claudio could answer, her tone casual and annoyingly smug. "Oh, that? First time. Didn't expect it to be so much." Claudio burst into laughter, wrapping an arm around Liz as though her comment was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. He even started giving her details, explicit ones, that made Felicia's cheeks burn with embarrassment. If she could have buried herself 6 feet under to avoid the humiliation, she would have. This wasn't like her brother at all. He was always shy, reserved, the type to avoid even the slightest inappropriate joke. But maybe, she reasoned, he was just feeling confident after his first time with an incredibly attractive woman. Felicia shook her head and decided to let it go, brushing off her unease as an overreaction. She apologized, muttered goodnight, and started to leave. The moment the door clicked behind her, she heard the couple laughing and kissing again. Felicia paused for a moment in the hallway. It was too much blood. Sure, every woman's experience is different, she thought, but this felt excessive. Still, they seemed fine. More than fine, in fact. They looked radiant. Maybe she was just overthinking things. But that's when it began. The rhythmic creaking of the bed, the loud, unfiltered words spilling out of their mouths. The sheer volume of it all was enough to make Felicia's face burn with secondhand embarrassment. She tried drowning it out with the sound of rain on her headphones, turning the volume higher and higher, but the noise outside suddenly became unbearable. She pulled off her headphones and moved toward the window overlooking the street. What she saw made her heart sink. Neighbors were peering outside, their faces pale with confusion and fear. Dogs were barking violently, slamming themselves against gates as if desperate to escape. Their howls were tinged with terror, as though they could sense something no human could. Cats, with their freedom to roam, darted away in every direction, their owners chasing after them in panic. Birds fled from nearby trees, their wings cutting through the night air as they vanished into the distance. Felicia stood frozen by the window, her unease twisting into dread. Something wasn't right. Something terrible was coming. Felicia turned around, her eyes wide with shock. That noise came from the room. She slowly approached, her footsteps silent, and returned to the closed door of their room, listening to the laughter and heavy breathing inside.
If you're tired of just listening, sister-in-law, feel free to open the door and watch up close.
The embarrassment was overwhelming. Her hands trembled, and her face flushed red with shame. How on earth did Liz know she was there? Felicia had been completely silent. Unable to muster the courage to respond, she retreated to the living room, where her makeshift mattress lay, giving the couple their privacy. With everything that had happened, it took Felicia a long time to fall asleep, but eventually exhaustion won. She didn't quite understand what was happening. It felt like a trance. She found herself unable to move, her vision blurred, caught between dreaming and waking. Through the haze, she saw blonde hair cascading over her. Liz was lying on top of her.
Thanks for the dinner you prepared, sister-in-law. I really liked you, and I hope you enjoy what I've done with your brother.
She then saw that woman leaving, opening the door, smiling, and disappearing. Felicia woke up, unsure if it had been a dream or reality. It felt far too vivid. Until she started hearing. Claudio was sitting at the kitchen table, devouring every last loaf of sliced bread they had. The crinkling of the plastic bags and the sound of his chewing echoed through the house. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days, even though Felicia had prepared a delicious dinner just yesterday to welcome his new girlfriend. She tried to convince him to stop, reminding him of their tight finances as they managed the house alone. But he snapped, shouting and throwing her a chilling glare, like a wild animal feeling threatened. And that's when Felicia made her first mistake. She decided to let it go. It was the beginning of a series of catastrophic events. Felicia stepped outside, hearing the murmurs of concerned neighbors. Police cars were parked nearby, and many gates were bent or broken, stained with streaks of red, likely from the frightened dogs, which had only calmed after leaving the street entirely. She scanned the crowd, trying to piece together what had happened, but then she noticed him. At the far end of the street stood a menacing man dressed in black, with a wide-brimmed hat that concealed most of his face. Yet she knew he was staring directly at her. Terrified, she rushed back inside and locked every door and window. The following days were hell. Fights erupted one after another. Claudio returned home with bruises and bloodied knuckles, evidence of brawls he'd gotten into. Food vanished faster than it could be replenished, and money was running out. Felicia avoided him whenever possible, even sneaking out of the house when he took his long, boisterous showers, where his unsettling sounds of relief under the water echoed throughout the home. Her unease grew unbearable. Everything came to a breaking point when Felicia returned home after a long day of work. The sight in the kitchen froze her in place. Piles of raw chicken thighs and wings sat on the counter, all partially chewed. Horrified, she dropped her bag and frantically began searching for Claudio, and then she started hearing it. Felicia's jaw trembled uncontrollably, her teeth grinding as if by their own will. Her entire body felt frozen, incapable of even sweating, despite being on the brink of collapse from sheer terror. Her heart seemed to stop beating as a bone-chilling sensation crept up her spine, as though an icy fingertip was trailing along her back, reaching the nape of her neck. She felt a warm breath brush against her neck. Turning around sharply, she saw nothing. But then, sudden footsteps pounded across the rooftop, followed by a guttural roar. Felicia screamed and bolted, diving under the bed in desperation. Trembling, she lay motionless, listening as the eerie sounds moved through the walls. She could hear her neighbors yelling, their voices filled with panic, until the terrifying noise began to fade into the distance. She stayed hidden for what felt like an eternity, gathering enough courage to crawl out. Surveying the house, it seemed safe for now. With trembling hands, she made her way to the telephone, dialed the police, and reported the incident. But the weight of her fear returned tenfold when she realized Claudio wasn't home. Anxiously, she turned on the TV to distract herself. The news report chilled her blood. A woman had been found lifeless in a nearby alley. The details were gruesome. Her body had been savagely chewed. Felícia broke down, tears streaming as she tried to process everything. Where was Claudio? Was he safe? Minutes felt like hours before the front door creaked open. There he was, Claudio, shirtless, utterly exhausted, stumbling into the kitchen before collapsing onto the floor. With every ounce of strength she could muster, Felícia dragged him down the hallway and onto his bed. Once she managed to lay him down, she sank to the floor weeping. They had no parents, no family, only each other. And now, her brother seemed to be spiraling into something beyond her understanding. Determined to find answers, Felícia steeled herself and approached Claudio's dresser. Opening the top drawer, she found his journal. It wasn't locked. Flipping through the pages, her breath caught. Claudio had harbored deep hatred for their parents, their father for abandoning them and their mother for being too weak to endure her loneliness, ultimately taking her own life. The entries revealed a side of Claudio she'd never seen, a man who bore the weight of their past in silence, all for her sake. Her brother, her hero, had been carrying an unbearable burden for years, hiding his pain behind a mask of strength. Tears streamed down her face as she read on, learning just how much he'd sacrificed for her. But then the entries grew darker. He described the night he met Liz at the bar, how they talked for hours and eventually started dating. He wrote about introducing her to Felícia during that fateful dinner when she had given them the privacy of her room. And then, Liz vanished. Her phone was disconnected, her home abandoned. She had simply disappeared. The abrupt loss devastated Claudio. His journal began to spiral into unsettling thoughts, detailing his growing hatred for women, describing them as succulent and irresistible. The final entry stopped her cold. Liz, I can't resist anymore. I'm going back to the bar. That girl, she'll make a perfect feast for my body. Felícia exhaled deeply, forcing herself to believe the exhaustion she'd seen in him was due to being with someone else. Perhaps he was simply moving on from Liz, trying to forget her. Reassured, she allowed herself to relax, thinking things might improve now. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of the nightmare. Everything seemed to have returned to normal. Claudio was eating like a human being again, no longer aggressive, and treating Felícia better than ever before. The shy, introverted boy was gone, replaced by a more confident Claudio, who hugged Felícia from behind, kissed her cheek, told her she was beautiful, and showered her with gifts. On top of that, he often went out to parties and clubs, returning exhausted and staggering as usual. The only thing that still worried Felícia, to the point of begging her brother to be cautious, was that the beast terrorizing the town had not been caught. Women continued to be found lifeless in alleys, mangled beyond recognition, with only dental records identifying them. It was a nightmare scenario, but Claudio's reassurance and his apparent transformation into a responsible, confident man allowed her to brush away the fear. Claudio seemed to work miracles, earning promotions quickly, making sound investments, and improving their home. Financially, they were thriving. But things took a strange turn when Felícia came home one day to find their separate twin beds replaced by a single, large bed. Puzzled, she questioned Claudio about it, and he simply replied that he wanted to be closer to her and longed for affection. Although it felt odd, Felícia had always been lonely and craved companionship. Having Claudio's presence nearby gave her comfort. At night, Claudio would cuddle her, stroke her hair, and kiss her cheek. It felt protective, like he had stepped into the role of a parent. But Claudio's intentions were far from innocent. One night, as Claudio was stroking her hair, His kisses grew more intense, trailing down her neck while his hands gripped her waist. For a fleeting second, a second she would regret for the rest of her life, Felícia gave in to his advances. In that brief moment he kissed her, and touched her in ways no sibling should. The moment shattered when Felicia's eyes shot open and she screamed, shoving him away. She cried and yelled, overcome by the shame and horror of the situation. Claudio, however, seemed unfazed. He simply remarked that it felt good and suggested they explore it further. Felícia lashed out, calling him every vile name she could think of and threatening to leave the house. That threat ignited a dangerous fury in Claudio. He grabbed her arm with a grip so strong it felt like her bones might break. She screamed at him to stop, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. The beating he inflicted on her was brutal, but nothing hurt more than realizing the perpetrator was her own brother, the man she had loved and admired her entire life. After leaving her bruised and battered, Claudio took a shower, got dressed, and stormed out of the house. For 3 agonizing days, he didn't return. Felícia, consumed by guilt and despair, blamed herself. She believed she had been too harsh and should have handled the situation differently. Then, the doorbell rang. Gathering herself as best as she could, Felícia opened the door to find a man dressed in heavy clothing and a hat. He pressed the doorbell insistently and identified himself as a police officer. Felicia's heart sank, imagining the worst for Claudio. Without thinking, she let the man in. The officer introduced himself as Domenico Magalhães and took a seat in the living room. He began asking Felícia unsettling questions, like whether she envied children who had parents, or if she ever felt overwhelmed by the responsibilities thrust upon her at a young age. Felícia snapped, accusing him of overstepping his bounds. Tears welled up as she insisted that their unusual family situation wasn't grounds for judgment. Domenico reassured her that he wasn't there to judge but to speak with Claudio, whom he believed to be the one behind the horrifying murders. No, Felícia stammered. Claudio could never do such a thing. Domenico pressed on, asking if Claudio had befriended anyone recently, or exhibited sudden, extreme changes in behavior, such as rapid muscle growth or uncharacteristic aggression. Out of loyalty to her brother, Felícia lied and denied everything. The officer thanked her and rose to leave, but before walking out, he turned and said, "In the past 3 days, the number of women found has increased exponentially. Whatever beast is doing this is growing bolder. Stay safe." Felícia collapsed to the floor, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Relief came only when the phone rang. It was Claudio. "Where are you? The police are after you," she exclaimed. Claudio, calm and composed, explained that he had reconnected with Liz, who wanted to apologize. He invited Felícia to join him in meeting her. Desperate to help her brother, she agreed, and they arranged to meet at midnight the following day. The hours dragged on like days, but the time finally came. Felícia met Claudio at the designated spot, and he greeted her warmly, apologizing profusely for his behavior. He assured her that Liz wanted to make amends and promised to clear everything up with the police later. They walked together, Claudio leading the way with an unsettling ease. Suddenly he turned into an alley, and Felícia followed hesitantly. The alley was a dead end. "Where's Liz?" Felícia asked. Claudio's tone shifted. "She'll return to me once I prove I'm ready to be the alpha predator," he said coldly. Claudio began undressing, muttering about not wanting his clothes to tear. As he disrobed, Felicia's legs trembled, and a sickening realization washed over her. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused to move. Her mind reeled with despair, leaving her frozen in place. Claudio's transformation began with blood-curdling screams. His bones cracked and stretched, muscles bulging grotesquely. His hair fell away as his skin darkened to a sickly purple hue. His jaw extended, revealing sharp fangs, and his eyes sank into hollow sockets. The brother she loved was gone. Now, standing before her was the monstrous, infamous purple demon. He approached her slowly, savoring her terror as she closed her eyes, praying for a swift, painless end. But Claudio had no intention of making it quick. He raised his arms, ready to break some of his sister's bones, but the sound of gunfire echoed, and bullets struck his back. The monster roared in pain, turning to see a man in a hat standing there. It was Domenico, who had been watching Felicia's house and had followed her here. To be sure of his target, he had waited until Claudio transformed. Now, with 2 revolvers, Domenico fired frantically at the monster, who charged at him. A brutal fight ensued. Domenico dodged the monster's swipes and spinning attacks, forcing Claudio to focus on him. Seeing the distraction as her opportunity, Felicia slowly backed out of the alley. As Domenico and the monster moved further away, Felicia began to inch closer to safety. But when the 2 combatants reached the main street, Claudio abruptly turned toward his sister and started running after her. Now, Felicia's survival instincts kicked in. She screamed and ran as fast as her legs would carry her. Domenico continued shooting and shouting, purposefully drawing the attention of nearby houses. Lights began to flicker on and dogs barked wildly. Claudio hesitated. He couldn't let anyone see him as a monster, or he would lose Liz forever. Instead, he turned and sprinted down the street away from Domenico, desperate to escape. But that's exactly what Domenico had planned. Felicia reached the end of the block first. When she looked around, she saw 2 people, one at each corner, hidden and armed with rifles. They were waiting. Turning back, she saw Claudio charging toward her, completely exposed and without clothes. Memories flooded her mind. Her brother, strong for her, stepping up as a protector and caretaker. Her heart swelled with instinctive, almost maternal love. She shouted and raised her hand, warning him to stop. Claudio understood the signal and tried to halt, but it was too late. The 2 men stepped out of hiding and opened fire. At the same time, Domenico reloaded and shot as well. Multiple bullets struck Claudio, who collapsed to the ground, bleeding profusely. Felicia rushed to her brother's side. Kneeling beside him, she noticed that some of the bullets were green, glowing faintly with an otherworldly hue. In his final moments, Claudio seemed to return to himself, the boy he once was before everything fell apart. He held Felicia's face, his trembling hands stained with blood. He confessed, "Be careful. That night I screamed because she bit me. Then, it was like I wasn't myself anymore." His last words were, "Forgive me. I love you." His arms fell limp, and his head dropped against her chest. Felicia wailed, her cries filled with agony. She cradled her brother, both a monster and a victim, in her arms. The 2 riflemen approached Domenico, joined by 2 more from the opposite corner. The group began to disperse, leaving Domenico behind. He walked up to Felicia, who was still sobbing over her brother's body. She pleaded for answers, desperate to know what had happened. Domenico stared at her, his expression heavy with pity. He told her there was a way to get the answers she sought, but the path would be long and fraught with pain. "I have nothing left to lose," Felicia replied, her voice hollow. With a resigned look, Domenico delivered a single blow to her face, knocking her unconscious. She awoke moments later to the glare of police car lights and ambulance sirens. Officers and neighbors crowded the scene. Turning her head, she saw Claudio's body being zipped into a black bag. Nearby, a massive wolf's lifeless body lay riddled with bullet wounds. The news reported that a hunter and a wolf had attacked 2 young people in the neighborhood. The wolf was killed, and the poor boy succumbed to his injuries while his sister survived with minor wounds. Felicia corroborated the story, remembering Domenico's warning not to tell the truth. Domenico himself was nowhere to be found. After hours of questioning and isolation, Felicia returned home. In her room, she collapsed onto the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. Everyone she loved was gone, leaving her utterly alone. As she straightened the sheets, she discovered a small box hidden under her pillow. Opening it, she found a photo of Liz in a different city, standing in a different place. Her grief turned to rage. Inside the box was also a rustic yellow lightning bolt-shaped brooch and a note. "Show me what you can do alone. Find me, find us, and I will give you all the answers." Felicia closed the box, took a shower, and packed her belongings, a backpack, a suitcase, and her remaining savings. She left the house without looking back. Her only thought as she walked away, revenge. And so begins a journey we will follow together. Tell me in the comments what you think the condition was that attracted Liz to Claudio and Felicia. Felicia's story will return to this channel soon. Meanwhile, did you know that a man once bet his own child's soul with the devil, unknowingly entering a horrific game of manipulation and deceit? Check out the video on the screen to see the consequences of his actions. That's all for now. Until next time.